Hello everybody, welcome indeed to Knitter Matters episode 8. I'm standing here because I just wanted to introduce you to Mabel the mannequin. She doesn't say a lot, but she's an important part of my life in sewing and knitting. And a lot of you have asked me over the weeks what's going on Mabel, because I change the scenery for her every week. But essentially it's just different projects, they're work in progresses that I'm doing, or works in progress. And this one, I just thought I would show you this one. It's not my design, it's a design by Nora Gohan, who's famous for her intricate cable work. But this is a fun one because it's all in hexagons, and then you join them together, and then you make the sleeve. I have all the hexagon pieces, I'm just laying it out on Mabel so I can get an idea for the positioning and how many more that I need. I'm also thinking about the button that I might use, and maybe I'll trim it somewhere, and so on and so on. So every week I've got some yarns on there, and they're all things, projects that I'm either about to do or I'm doing. Anyway, before we're going to just, while I sit down, we're going to move the camera around and then we can get started. So thank you so much for joining me. This is very exciting. I am Cheryl Lampard of Style Matters International. And if you're new to Knitter Matters, thank you so much for joining. Please let me know where you're from. I won't be able to see this while we're doing this, but I promise I will get back to you afterwards. And also if there's feedback and comments as we go along, please put it in the comment box. I promise to answer you afterwards. So my two passions in life are sewing and knitting. And sewing I love, but knitting is one of those things that I de-stress with my knitting. I find it very therapeutic, and I think a lot of other people do too. And many years ago I owned a yarn store in Brighton, England called Yomo. And if you want to see more of that, there's a whole bunch of photos on the Knitter Matters page from start to finish of the shop. Anyway, today, it's very exciting today, because if you're on this page, then congratulations, you've come to the right page for this Facebook Live, because we've moved it from my personal page to Knitter Matters. And that's all down to you guys. Because of all your likes and shares and views, I've had an overwhelming response, and I'm thrilled to bits. So much so that we've created a single page for it called Knitter Matters, which is entirely devoted to knitting and these Facebook Lives and any kind of knitting matter. So that's really exciting. We will of course share the videos afterwards on that page, and they're all there if you want to go back to the beginning. Before we get on to the main focus of today, which is lace knitting, I want to talk to you a bit about needles. I get asked a lot of questions about the knitting needles and personal favorites and why I use the ones that I do. Well, what I would say to you is it really boils down to three things. Personal choice. Oops, camera's going all over the place there. Just bear with us a second. It comes down to personal choice, the project suitability, and your budget. But I'm going to show you a few of the needles that I like to use and use for different projects. So these little plastic ones, these I got just for our Facebook Lives because a viewer said they'd find it clearer to see what I was doing with my hands if I used different color needles. So these fit the purpose. But I don't generally like to use plastic ones. I find them sort of a bit hot and sticky on my hands. They're great to start out with, they're inexpensive, and they're wonderful for children if you want to get children knitting. So they certainly have their place. If you have certain hand issues like arthritis, you might find more comfort in bamboo needles. This is a pair of bamboo needles that I've had for years. All of these things I've built up a collection of over the years. These two are bamboo needles. They're just much finer and shorter. When I had my store, my mother was an avid knitter, but she had stopped for a while because she had arthritis in her hands and she found knitting difficult with metal needles. But she was keen to knit things and support me in the store, so I put her onto bamboo needles, and then it was almost as if she couldn't stop knitting. It made such a difference to her. and she knitted a lot of things afterwards, so it's worth a try. The downside to any bamboo needles, the thin ones tend to be a bit whippy. The very fine ones tend to get a bit whippy. They're not so bad at that length, but when they get really long, they can be a bit kind of springy. You may like that, and that's fine if you do. Over time, the points can get a bit dull and they can split. They also tend to mold more to the shape of your hands. I don't mind that at all. Some people don't like it. One thing about knitting with bamboo needles is sometimes there is color transfer. If you're knitting with indigo dyes or denim-y dyes or very dark dyes, you may find some color transfer on the needles over time. That's not such a big issue. You just may need to get a different pair if you're going to knit with a light yarn afterwards. Then metal needles. I love these. These are really nice metal needles. They're beautifully designed, very sharp points, so they're great for lace knitting. When I bought these, I bought the longer ones. I'm actually, with hindsight, I now find those a little bit unwieldy. The weight distribution is fine, but if I'm only got a certain amount of stitches on the needle, as I'm knitting, sometimes the needle flies out of my hand, narrowly missing my husband, who's sitting on the other sofa. So again, the length of the needle is important. Needles can be sold in different lengths. If I'm working on a small project, then I'll use a shorter needle. A long project with a lot of stitches, I will want a longer needle. But again, you may find the longest needle is too long. If I buy these in future, I'll buy a slightly shorter length. There's a length in between this size and this size. So again, you need to practice that and you need to try them out. Wooden needles, again, really nice and comfortable for big projects. They are less bendable, but again, they don't tend to weigh too heavily on your hands. So that's always a good option. And you can get them very easily. I've built my collection up over the years, but I've found a very good resource here in the US is Mary Maxim. They also operate in Canada too. So you can get their stuff online. They have a huge selection of different needles. On now to circular needles. We haven't, camera's going to cross with me, but I'm just going to move some things about and then I'll show you what I'm doing. So circular needles, you definitely need them when you're knitting in the round. And circular needles are like this. But you don't have to. This means knitting in the round. We haven't done that yet, but we will do that in future. It means that you can knit without needing a join, and certain projects require that. Certain projects you might like to have that, but certain projects you absolutely do need that. So circular needles are wonderful things. They take a little bit of getting used to, but I love them. You can also use them for what I would call flat knitting. Let me get these things out the way. Then I will show you. I'm working on a project at the moment where there's a lot of stitches on. I've got about 220 stitches here on this particular piece of knitting. So that's really too many for me on a straight needle. But I can knit with a circular needle. I'm just not knitting in the round. The benefit of this, if you have a lot of stitches, is that the weight is kind of sitting in your lap when you're doing the knitting. The weight isn't on the needles, it's not on your hands. So again, if you have hand issues, and I have some of my mother's hand arthritis, so I find these very comfortable to knit with. They're flexible. The weight is in my lap, it's not on my hands, it's not going across my hands as a straight needle would. These particular ones have a kind of squared off needle, as it were. There is a name for this and it escapes me, this part of the needle, but these are actually square. I'm not sure if it makes a difference. I quite like them. I don't dislike them. I possibly wouldn't go out of my way to buy them. I'm perfectly happy with the regular circular needle. But again, a lot of people do like them. So you have to try these things and test them out. The only downside, sorry, there's lots of fluff left now. The only downside to sometimes circular needles is that, yes, you need different lengths for the work that you're doing. So you could end up buying, say you needed a size, I don't know, a size 5, but you need it in a 12-inch length for one project, then you have another project and you need, you know, a 48-inch length. Well, you've got to buy the same needle and in a different cable length. That can get annoying and expensive. So the answer there then is interchangeable needles. This is a set of interchangeable needles. They, for very large, I've got even smaller ones than this. This particular brand does a very nice interchangeable set, and there's different cable lengths. So what I do is these fix onto here, these screw onto here, and then there is a very nice little T-pin arrangement that you just tighten that up so it doesn't unscrew while you're knitting. So I've got different cable sizes in this little pack. On my 5-inch tips, just unscrew. And these are called interchangeables. I do recommend that when you use interchangeables, you do use that little tool that they give you. It's like a little T-pin to tighten that. Otherwise, sometimes when you're knitting, it can unscrew. But somehow that little T-pin has a magic effect. And you can get circular needles in any type of material. You can get them in wood, you can get them in bamboo, you can get multicolored versions. It's about what your preference is. So, and they are great for lace knitting, as I showed you, which is a lovely segue into today's topic, which is an introduction to lace. Now, lace knitting and knitted lace are slightly different things. Lace knitting is where they, strictly speaking, they're not the same thing. Knitted lace technique means that there is a stitch pattern on both sides of the work, on the right side and the wrong side. So essentially the lace is exactly like lace, it's sort of reversible. But lace knitting, you tend to do the pattern on one side only, the right side, and the other side tends to be pearl or whatever the stitch is. But either way, the whole point of lace knitting is that you get a really nice airy open fabric, which is perfect for shawls, wraps, lightweight garments. And they're often using very fine yarns, but they don't have to be. This I have done in a thicker yarn, and it's called a grapevine pattern. I'll turn that so the camera can see it. And it consists of stitches that you've already done.
It would be very helpful actually for the viewer if you took it off the...
I'm sorry, okay? Now you can see. I'm so sorry.
Now you've got the contrast now.
I just have to get up from my seat for one moment and go fetch something from the other side of the room, because my knitting, to give you a demonstration...
Ladies outside.
Okay, bear with me a second. I'm so sorry, everybody. It's been a busy morning. Okay, I'll have to... Forget it, can't find it. I don't know where that's gone. I'll work it out. Okay, I just wanted to show you the stitch in a minute, which I will do. Okay, so this is called a grapevine pattern. It's actually consisted of things, a stitch called a yarn over, and you use the yarn over stitch when we actually made this neck wrap some weeks ago. And we used the yarn over stitch when we did the buttonholes. It created the hole. Okay, and a yarn over is usually accompanied by a decrease, because when you do a yarn over, you're actually making an extra stitch, and then you have to decrease to retain the number of stitches. So you've already done this stitch. I will teach you another stitch which is newer, but when you make holes, that's an essential part of lace knitting. And just to show you how different it can be in a finer yarn, what I did here, I cast on the same amount of stitches. The only thing I did differently, I had 2 border stitches here. I didn't have 2 here. I cast on the same number of stitches, but this is a much finer cotton yarn and this is a thicker Aran yarn. I've been using yarn that I've got. So you can see how much this pulls out, and that's the purpose of lace knitting. When you block it, it creates a much, you know, area open fabric, which is what you want. But you don't have to have a lace garment to do the techniques, which is why I did it in this Aran one as well. So you can see it makes a really nice pattern, but that could be a sweater, it could be on the hem of a garment, it could be a number of things. So that's the same pattern, different thickness of yarn, different weight of yarn, and different size of needle. So when it comes to eyelets, which is what you get with a yarn over, this is a simple eyelet pattern. This is a yarn over and a knit two together pattern. So you might think, well, that's great, it's just a line of holes. Yes, it is. But here's another couple of things you can do. So if you were to fold that, you could make that a very nice hemline on the bottom of a garment. Could even be around the neckline of a garment, or it could be around the edge of a sleeve. You get a nice sort of double edge and you get the sort of picot edge. The other thing that this could be useful for, and again, this is just ideas. So you could actually weave in some ribbon here. This is called a thang, and it is because it does all sorts of things. So you could just weave in some ribbon if you wished. You can do it by hand, or you can do it with a needle, a yarn needle. And of course my ribbon has gone around the wrong way, but never mind. The principle is the same. See how pretty that could look on something? On a child's dress, or even on a garment. So it might be just a hole in your knitting, a deliberate one, but there's other things you can do with it. So let me show you how to do your yarn overs and your decrease at the same time. By the way, if anybody is interested in this grapevine pattern, I know some of you do ask me for the sample swatches, how I knitted them. I don't always have the patterns because sometimes I just sit there needling away. But I did actually type that out for you, so if anybody wants that, I have it. You can just drop me a line afterwards. I'll be happy to send it to you as a PDF, as indeed, and I'll mention this because you might need to refer to this, I did a whole list of basic abbreviations, and that's another thing that I can do as a PDF. Okay, I'm just going to move Mabel a moment because I need to get some yarn out so I can show you this technique. I'm sorry that this is a deliberate error on my part, but I put the bag somewhere where I'd done my example piece and it's nowhere to be seen now. No matter, we will manage. Okay, so I just need a pair of needles. I'm going to do my plastic needles so that you can see. I'm just going to cast on a few stitches. There is another stitch that I'm going to show you. I'm going to bring back the abbreviations here, and it's called SSK, slip slip knit. That's a really important one. You will see that a lot in lace knitting. Slip slip knit. And then all these stitches you will have already done in one way or another, whether you realize it or not. Let me cast on a few stitches and I'll show you how to do these. Just bear with me for a second. I only need to cast on a few stitches. I had everything all prepared, but it's been quite a busy morning. I'm going to cast on a bit with the cable cast on. This is going to look quite loose and airy, and that's fine. It's cable knitting. It's lace knitting, so that's just fine. Not sure how many I've cast on there. Doesn't matter too much. You can knit with me or knit afterwards. Okay, I'm just going to do a couple of rows of garter stitch. So don't think that lace knitting has to be on fine needles and very fine yarn. It can be, and you get a lovely result. But you'll need a lot of stitches on your needle, and that can be a bit daunting for a beginner because it doesn't grow very quickly, and that may be fine for you. But I would practice on a slightly bigger, a thicker yarn and a bigger needle. And don't worry if while you're knitting it you think, my goodness, this doesn't look like the design or the pattern, this looks a real mess. There's one of the things with lace knitting that it doesn't look terribly good on the needles necessarily. It needs to be blocked and steamed or wet blocked, which is something that we will do in due course. And what that means is that you actually wet, in most cases you wet the piece of knitting, and then you actually pin it out to the correct dimensions that it's meant to be. But it doesn't look like you hope it looks on the needles necessarily, but don't worry about that. The blocking will take care of that, and we'll do that another time. Okay, I'm just going to do a row of purl here so that we have a bit of stocking stitch on the go, or stockinette stitch, and then I'll show you how to do the yarn overs. I'll show you how to do that eyelet stitch, and I'll show you how to do the SSK, slip slip knit. Okay, there we go. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to do a couple of stitches in. Now the yarn over, remember I'm doing a knit stitch, so the yarn is at the back of my knitting. I bring it forward. This is if you're doing it on a knit row. I position my needle, so I'm going to do my next stitch, and the yarn is over that needle. It's over. I make a stitch. Now I've made an extra stitch, and you can see the hole there. So I'm going to do another stitch. I'm going to do a yarn over again. And you'll see I've got more stitches on my needle. Some patterns do that. That's another thing with lace knitting. And patterns will say, hopefully, that there are more stitches on some rows than others. The little swatch that I did is a multiple of 8 stitches. This little swatch, the actual pattern is a multiple of 8 stitches, but some rows have more stitches than others. So you have to be aware of that, because if you start counting your stitches to make sure you've got the right number, if you've counted them on a row when you've got more stitches because of the yarn overs, you'll drive yourself crazy. So hopefully your pattern will say, but just bear in mind that happens a lot. So I've actually got a lot of stitches now on my needle. I don't want them all. So I'm not going to decrease those. What you'll normally find is that when there is a yarn over, which is that one, it's then accompanied by a knit 2 together. Okay, yarn over, knit 2 together. Okay, I'm just going to whiz to the end of this purl row. It's going to look terribly messy because I've done all sorts of things on this, but I just want to show you the difference. The key thing is to follow what your pattern says. If it says a yarn over and then you knit a certain amount of stitches, that's what you do. If it's a yarn over and then a decrease, that's what you do. But whatever it says you need to do, follow it. Okay, so you can see quite clearly there the little eyelets. And there I've got more stitches than I need. There you can see the eyelets with my knit 2 together, which is exactly what I did on this. It was a yarn over, knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 2 together. That's all I did. Let me do one straight row of knit stitches, and then I'll show you the slip slip knit. And it is the combination of those stitches that gives you the pattern, whether it's this grapevine stitch that I showed you, because there's nothing terribly fancy there. It's just a combination of knit, knit two together, yarn overs, and slip, slips, knit. If there's anything that's not clear, let me know and I'll answer afterwards. So you can quite clearly see, this is a messy piece of knitting, I know, but you can quite clearly see how the eyelets form, or the holes form. So now we're going to do slip, slip, knit. Now you might think, well, I can just do this a different way. Let me show you what you do. You slip, slip. So both those stitches are slipped knitwise onto the right hand needle. Then you put the tip of the left hand needle in there at the front and you knit. Okay, I am going to do a yarn over there and I'm going to do slip, slip. So both those stitches are slipped knitwise onto my right needle. I put the tip of my left there and then I knit. Don't think, well, I'll slip them both at the same time. You'll get a completely different result. Don't think, oh, I'll just go through the back of the needles. That's a completely different stitch. So it's slip, slip, knit. Then I've got my yarn over. What you're getting is a left leaning decrease, if that makes sense. And that's important for getting the shape. You can see that leans, that stitch leans. I'll just finish the row. That's another yarn over, slip, slip, knit. So don't try and cheat because you will get a completely different result. So if I bring back these little samples now, it's just all created with, this is the slip, slip, knit, that left leaning decrease. This is where I've done a knit two together and these are the yarn overs. So in this pattern, it's a 12 row pattern. So my knit two togethers are there, that's a yarn over, then that's a slip, slip, knit, then it's a few knit stitches, it's a knit two together, it's a yarn over, it's a slip, slip, knit, it's a few stitches there, and so on. Then on the reverse row it's just purling across, and then there's just a different amount of stitches that I do in between them. But if I just bring that pattern in again, you'll see that it's knit one, it's yarn over, it's slip, slip, knit, knit two. There's nothing else other than the knit two together, the yarn over and the knit stitches and your purl stitches on the reverse row. So that simple stitch combination results in something really quite special, and you can use it on lots of different things. So thank you for bearing with me with our little snafus today. Sorry about that, but I hope you found this useful. I hope there was information there that you can take away and practice. Thank you for the feedback. Please keep giving me feedback. Please tell me what you'd like to see in future, because it's all down to you that this page exists, and I couldn't be happier. I'm here to help. So thank you for joining again. Stay well, stay home, keep calm, and keep knitting. And I'll see you next week. Thank you for now. Goodbye for now, everyone.